Hey everybody, what's up? Chad Wesley Smith here, and today I'm going to be continuing my series on the scientific principles of strength training with principle number 4, SRA, Stimulus Recovery Adaptation. So if you haven't already, go back and check out our principles 1, 2, and 3, specificity, overload, and fatigue management. Make sure you understand those before watching this video. And as always, this video is brought to you by the JuggernautAI app, which you can get a 2-week free trial on from the link down in the description. So highest rated strength training app. We just added strongman training to it, bench only training to it, all kinds of new stuff coming, deadlift only, push pull, performance AI, all type of stuff planned for 2025. So go check that out for a 2-week free trial from the link down in the description. So as we look at this principle of SRA, Stimulus Recovery Adaptation, this is really just describing the training process where you introduce a stimulus. From that stimulus, fatigue is generated, and then you have to recover from that fatigue. And then because of the stimulus that was introduced, you're eliciting an adaptation with that, hopefully the one that you want to elicit from the training. And so as you recover, and then you adapt from that training with a little bit of increased abilities from before, and then you train again, and the process continues over and over. But what's so important to understand about the principle of SRA is that not every aspect of training works in the same way. So for us, in the context of powerlifting, the squat, bench, and deadlift each don't even really perform in the same way or behave in the same way in regards to SRA, nor do your neural recovery, your muscular recovery, your tendon and joint health, your technique, all are going to respond a little bit differently to the stimulus that you introduce to it, and depending on what that stimulus is. So I want to help you better understand that. So let's jump in on the principle of SRA. So SRA stands for Stimulus Recovery Adaptation, and this is essentially the process of training. You introduce stimulus, that stimulus carries with it fatigue, you have to recover from that fatigue, and then you adapt to the stimulus provided to it, and depending on what that stimulus was. So finding the optimal frequency and intensities to load these different qualities is going to help you elicit the adaptations that you want and really maximize your training experience and growth in your training. So we want to help you understand, how does the squat respond, how does the bench respond, how does the deadlift respond, and the different qualities that you're looking to achieve. So typically of the 3 power lifts, squat, bench, and deadlift, the deadlift is going to have the longest SRA curve, meaning that, intensity being equalized between the lifts, relative intensity. So percentage of the 1 rep max, if you train the deadlift at 85%, that's going to take you a bit longer to recover from than training the squat at 85%, than training the bench at 85%. That's going to be because the deadlift has the most amount of muscles involved. You're lifting, typically the heaviest weights possible, and then you're moving them over, a relatively long, especially compared to the bench press, range of motion. Now, there are caveats within that, of course. If you are, a stronger squatter than you are a deadlifter, then maybe you have a longer SRA curve in the squat. If you're pulling sumo deadlift and you really are reducing your range of motion in it a lot, and you maybe have very long arms or a very whippy deadlift bar, and you reduce that range of motion a ton, that's going to start to equalize between the squat and the deadlift. If you just are naturally built better for one lift than the other, short, stumpy arms, makes you a great bench presser, and might mean that the bench is not, is even less stressful to you, and might make the deadlift even more stressful to you because your short, stumpy arms are having to move the bar so much further in the deadlift. Or if you have a great squatting build, a stockier, more barrel type of build, than a longer, lankier build in the deadlift, then you can see, the squat become a bit more stressful to you and the deadlift a bit less. So a lot of caveats in there, but all things being equal, which they never are. But if you have a relatively medium build, conventional deadlift is going to be the longest SRA curves, squat is in the middle, and bench the shortest. So the implications of that for your training means that probably least frequently training the deadlift, then squat's going to be somewhere in between, and then most frequently training the bench press. We could make it just kind of as simple as that, but there's nuance within that, because we're not just looking at one type of training or one quality that we're trying to develop. There's the muscular qualities, the neural demands of the lifts, and then the technical demands of the lifts. Because if all we did was take the deadlift and say, okay, well, you can't train this as frequently, and you're only going to deadlift once a week, well, because the technical SRA curve is a bit shorter than that, is your technique going to get optimized with only once a week training? So that's where, variation is going to start to come in, which is our next principle. So we'll talk about that more in the next video, but where you're going to start to utilize variation as a way to manipulate SRA and get more exposure to the lifts so you can better satisfy things like technical SRA while still being able to recover muscularly and neurally from those hard training sessions. All right, so I want to talk about how different physical qualities are going to have different length SRA curves and how that's going to, affect how we apply the principle of SRA in a proper application versus over or under application of it. So really looking at from longest to shortest, neural SRA curve is going to be the longest. So when that neural force production qualities and the nervous system fatigue takes the longest to recover from. Then your tendon and joint health and muscular damage and the muscular SRA curve, those are going to be about the same length. Depending on circumstance, they'll change a little bit. Like tendon and joint health, you have low blood flow to tendons and joints, so they don't recover as fast as muscles do, but they're also more durable, so they tend to balance out. As you get into higher intensity phases, like in a peaking phase, the tendons and joints are going to take a bit more stress compared to a hypertrophy phase where the muscles are going to take a bit more stress. But those are relatively the same length. And then the last piece is technical SRA. So the technical adaptations and your technical prowess in the lifts is going to be the shortest SRA curve. So that means you could do highly technical work really frequently. And if you were to go too long in between exposures to the exercises, you could have some technical decay, and that the curves, they don't just keep going up and adapting in perpetuity. They are gonna tail off. So the example I always use for technical SRA, and it's more appropriate now because I play a lot more golf than when I was doing a lot of seminars and talking about this, and didn't really play any golf then, but golf is a great example and illustration of technical SRA. Is, there's no professional golfer who's like, I play, just on the weekends with my buddies. Like, no, they're out hitting balls every single day, maybe multiple times a day, because when something is so fine-tuned as a golf swing, those technical SRA tiny changes need to be, refreshed and kept up on all the time, where, squat, bench, and deadlift, not nearly as technical or delicate as the golf swing. So it's not going to be as frequent, but you don't want to be too infrequent that you don't, have as strong a mastery of your technique as possible. So proper application of SRA is going to be a strategic sequencing of your training and strategic frequency to the training so that you can line up, end-to-end SRA curves as well as possible and not go too long in between, that you're not developing your technique to the fullest, but not go so frequently that you're not getting enough recovery and adaptation from the neural side of things, since that takes the longest. So the goal really becomes to train hard and then to recover well enough that you can train hard again without waiting too long so that your fitness starts to decline in between. Some common problems with the principle of SRA are going to be an under application where you're training with too high a frequency, and you might be getting great technical adaptations in that, and depending on your qualification as a lifter, it could be appropriate to train more and more frequently. But as you become intermediate and advanced lifter, if you're doing really high frequency training, like squatting 4 or 5 times a week, you're probably going to be under applying this principle and not giving yourself enough time for the recovery of neural, muscular, tendon, joint health qualities in between sessions. So there are ways to manipulate this, though, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. So an over application of the principle of SRA is going to be the other side of things, now that you're not training frequently enough. So, you might have watched a video. I remember, as a younger lifter, hearing about Konstantin Konstantinov's only doing deadlifts every 14 days. And, you could hear that, and when you're deadlifting 315 or 405, you'd be like, well, one of the best deadlifters ever is only doing every 14 days. So I should only do every 14 days. Well, yes, he's doing that because his deadlift sessions are 850, 900 pounds. When yours are 350 or 400 pounds, you're not getting near the neural fatigue that comes with that, as well as not having nearly as long a history of deadlifts. So, to illustrate this in a simpler way, if you had someone who's they've been training for 0 days, well, and they deadlifted twice in a week, all right, now they've worked for 2 days and had 5 days off, so they've had the majority of their career has been off of deadlifts in this very short term, to kind of use a hyperbolic example, compared to someone who's been training for 20 years. For them to only deadlift twice a week and have those 5 days, it's such a small proportion of their entire training career, it's not nearly as significant for them to do a little bit lower frequency. That over application, when you're waiting too long, you're not maximizing your adaptations, particularly from a technical standpoint, or maybe you're waiting for everything to be recovered. And the best training, it doesn't mean that you're always fully recovered. It means that you're doing training appropriate for how recovered that you are. So this idea of doing training that's appropriate for how recovered you are is really where the nuance and the beauty of the principle of SRA comes into play. And this is going to be about utilizing variation in your exercises to have an effective training session, even though it might not be, the biggest or hardest training session. So when you introduce that initial stimulus and there's fatigue generated from that, recovery and adaptations are occurring. Yes, if you were to introduce the same identical stimulus and it's going to have the same amount of fatigue, and that might end up driving you down, or you're having to wait too long in between those for enough neural recovery to happen, but you're not getting the technical adaptations, that's when we want to use either a lighter session, just that could be a 5 to 10% reduction in intensity for the same sets and reps that you did before. We can make even a further manipulation by changing the volume, the number of sets and reps. We can make even a further application of this by manipulating the exercise that you choose, because some exercises are just like kind of self-limiting, or they don't lend themselves to the same level of overload. So if I was to do on Monday a conventional deadlift session from the floor, 3 sets of 5 at 400 pounds, but then on Friday I was to do 3 sets of 5 at 400 pounds, pulling from 4-inch blocks, that's not going to be as fatiguing of a session. I'm not going to drive as deep of fatigue as I would have with the first session, because it's not as long a range of motion, but I still had what I perceived to be a hard, challenging workout, and it's still going to be useful and give me stimulus in muscular hypertrophy and neural force production, and satisfy my technical SRA, but not drive the fatigue down too low. And that's with using identical absolute intensity and volume. I could make that session a little bit lighter. I could choose an exercise with even less fatigue to it. So something like a dumbbell RDL, and give those muscles for the deadlift some stimulus, enough of what they would need in that situation, but not drive the fatigue down too low to where I'm not recovered before my next big primary session. So it's just that every session doesn't have to be, balls to the wall kind of. There's a phrase that we use a lot in sport performance, that we want to stimulate, not annihilate. So that'll give you that stimulation to the muscles and the qualities that you're trying to develop, without being so fatiguing that you need a week or 2 weeks or whatever to recover from it. Now, the more advanced you are as a lifter, the bigger and stronger you are, typically the longer your SRA curves are going to be, so you won't be able to train as intensely, as frequently as a less advanced, shorter, lighter lifter. Female athletes can be able to lift hard more frequently than male athletes, because they're not getting the same hormonal response to the training. So those are all things to consider when you're deciding, how to line up your end-to-end SRA curves the most effectively. Now you're probably thinking, okay, all this theory is well and good, but like, how frequently should I actually train? So in the squat, I find most lifters to do well with 2 to 4 sessions a week. Again, those sessions are not all identical. So the 2 sessions could be, yes, 2 competition squat sessions, spread out a bit further. But if you don't need that much time for neural force production qualities to recover, maybe you're getting into 3 or 4 sessions, but in those kind of intermediate sessions, like if your big ones are Monday and Thursday, then maybe your Tuesday and Friday sessions are either with reduced intensity, of the same exercise, just not going as heavy by design. Maybe it's the same absolute intensity, but for lower reps per set. Let's go 6 on Monday, 4 on Tuesday, 5 on Thursday, 3 on Friday. So you're manipulating that way, where all the sessions are not like monostructural in how you approach them. Or you can even use more variation to manage fatigue even more. So you can turn those intermediate sessions into front squats or belt squats or split squats, or other squat variations that are giving muscular stimulus to the legs, because maybe the muscular systems are recovered, or they're giving technical stimulus to the squatting pattern, but they're giving a bit of a reprieve in regards to the joint and tendon health and the neural force production and the nervous system fatigue. So there's tons of different ways that you can approach that. You can go more in depth on this idea in our variation for fatigue management video, or utilizing variation for fatigue management. Or if you're like, oh my God, Chad, I'm so confused by everything you just said. Well, then you just sign up for the JuggernautAI app and it does it all for you, because it's going to individualize your frequency based on all these factors been talking about. It's looking at, male, female, height, weight, strength, experience, what's your sleep like, what's your diet like. All of those factors are being taken into account to optimize your frequency, as well as exercise selection based on your weak points, and then volume and intensity, all that good stuff as well, and your periodization structure. So if you like this video, please like and subscribe to the channel. And if you want to try the JuggernautAI app for 2 weeks free, visit the link down in the description or go to JuggernautAI.app. Thanks for watching.